繁忙过隙，我空的沙比是繁忙过隙，谁呀我的啦是繁忙过隙，我空的沙比是繁忙过隙，谁呀我的啦是繁忙过隙，我空的沙比是繁忙过隙，谁呀我的啦是繁忙过隙。我空的沙比是繁忙过隙，谁要我的呀是繁忙过隙，我空的沙比是繁忙过隙，谁要我的呀 God gave us power to rip down prisons, God gave us power to lift the people, God gave us courage. To withstand hatred, God gave us courage. Not to be bitter, God gave us power. And make us fearless, God gave us power. Because we need the Managosi. O come sabi, Managosi. Si awadida, Managosi. O come sabi, Managosi. Si awadida, Managosi. O come sabi, Managosi. Si awadida, Managosi. O come sabi, Managosi. Si awadida.
And Daniel Sandoval for that lovely rendition in Zulu of something I can't quite pronounce, but it means give us strength. This time and this place are hallowed by our presence and our commitment. Welcome, whoever you are, whomever you love, however you vote, whatever your race, age, class, or gender, whatever spiritual paths you have traveled, if any. You are welcome here. Our faith calls us not to a particular creed, but to a covenant to honor every person's worth and dignity. All we ask is that you come with an open mind and an open heart. I am R.K. Young, and I am the administrator here at the Unitarian Universalists of Transylvania County, where our mission is to support individual spiritual journeys and to promote social, economic, and environmental justice. To learn more about us and to sign up for our newsletter, visit our website at uutc.org. We are privileged this morning to have guest pianist Jennifer Hua playing a Bach prelude for us. Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer. Our announcements this morning start with the necessary health announcements. For our good health and safety, please wear masks while in the building unless you want to serve up here. We'll be happy to have you. Use the clipboards to sign your name and telephone number in case contact tracing becomes necessary. Enjoy the music without singing for the time being, but please dance and clap along as you're willing and able. Exit the building quickly between services to allow for more complete air exchange. Outside, we can socialize more freely. Offering baskets won't be passed from hand to hand, but you can drop your contribution and your name tag into the baskets at either side of the sanctuary or in the bowls by the doors on your way out. This month's special collection is for El Centro. El Centro supports Latino children, families, and the community at large in order to foster the integration of Latino and non-Latino residents of Transylvania County. This evening, beginning at 5:30, is our monthly BYOB at the RING, an intergenerational event staged around a fire. Bring the kids and we'll bring the marshmallows. Older kids can also enjoy the conversation and beverages. Tuesdays between 11:30 and 1:30, all are welcome to bring a lunch and join us out on the Fellowship Green under the colored shade sails. Either of these events are good ones for getting acquainted with our members and friends here at UTC, or just reconnecting for those of us who have been disconnected. Our first hymn this morning is number 109, As We Come Marching, Marching.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 workshops great, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we gather them again. Our life shall not be sweated, from birth until life closes. Hearts serve as well as bodies, give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing, narration's song of bread. Small art and love and beauty, their touching spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we bring the greater days. The rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler, and toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Our opening words this morning, number 578, come from our guest speaker today, Miss Olympia Brown. We can never make the world safe by fighting. Every nation must learn that the people of all the nations are children of God and must share the wealth of the world. Sometime, somehow, somewhere, we must ever teach this great lesson. Our chalice lighting this morning is by Samuel A. Trumborn, called O Light of Life. O light of life, be kindled again in our hearts as we meet together this morning to celebrate the joy of human community, seeking a wholeness that extends beyond ourselves. We now have our cycle of life. Cycle of life ritually holds our joys, sorrows, and concerns in loving community. If you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, share your concerns in the chat. I can't see what you post, but others can, and they will help to carry your burdens. If you have one, please light your own candle at home to add your energy to these thoughts and prayers. Thank Edie Gabsick for helping me this morning. Today's first candle is for the flame we all carry of life, worth, and dignity. May we remember that all are worthy. Our second candle is in thanks for justice tempered with compassion that promotes equity for all. May we remember that all paths deserve compassion. Our next candle is in thanks for the freedom to search for our own truths. May we remember that freedom requires constant attention and support at the courthouse and the ballot box, and not just on the battlefield. Our fourth candle is in thanks for the opportunity of a democratic process, which, when promoted and protected for all people, provides a path for peace, liberty, and justice for all across the world. Our next candle celebrates the diversity of the world's creatures, and yet calls us to remember that even this creation is ever-changing and vulnerable to abuse, and that we must be attentive to its needs, and not just in our politics, but in the choices of our daily lives. Our sixth candle is a light of courage to be whatever change is needed, just as Olympia Brown did and was in her time. Our time is now, and there is work to do. This final candle is for the joys and concerns held in your hearts. I invite you to pause and reflect on these and all other joys and sorrows that remain unspoken at this time.
To go before us, so lift me up to the light of change. There is hurting in my family, there is sorrow in my town, there is all across the nation, there is wailing the whole world round. I am open and I am willing for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. May the children see more clearly. May the elders be more wise. May the winds of change caress us, even though they burn our eyes. I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. Give me a mighty oak to hold my confusion. Give me a desert to hold my fears. Give me a sunset to hold my wonder. Give me an ocean to hold my tears. I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. So lift me up to the light of change.
That was spectacular. I'd like to introduce our speaker this morning by talking about the Constitution. The 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is 101 years old this month. It says, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Universalist minister Olympia Brown lived from 1835 to 1926 and was the first woman to be ordained by a religious denomination in the United States. Long before the Unitarian Universalist Association adopted our 7 principles, her faith inspired her to embody social action for the democratic process within our congregations and in the world at large. She was in the forefront of the women's suffrage movement, and she was one of the minority of leading suffragists who lived long enough to actually enjoy the right to vote. Vanessa Cowie is a retired youth librarian and has been a storyteller, actor, and magazine editor. She and her husband, Ian Cowie, moved to Transylvania County, thankfully, nearly 3 years ago from North Georgia. They have 2 children and 1 grandchild, Camden, who lives in Mills River and likes to paint and visit waterfalls with Gramps and Sessa. May I please introduce Miss Olympia Brown.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, RK. These They bring back my own life, what they call the Spanish influenza. We were quite accustomed to wearing masks in my day as well. There was one additional announcement, I'm told. Sadly, there's a memorial service this Saturday for Betsy Culpepper. It will be Saturday, August 7th at 2 p.m. here in person at UUTC with the Reverend Bob officiating. It will also be streamed on the internet. And I also must say thank you for that glorious music, Bread and Roses indeed. Bread for the soul, roses for the bread for the body, roses for the spirit. And indeed, isn't that what we all need and are struggling for? Especially, I'm grateful for the chalice lighting words, "O light of life, be kindled in our hearts as we seek a wholeness that extends beyond ourselves." That is meaningful to me because I think beyond our time in this life as well. For I come to you from your own history to remind you that you Unitarian Universalists are not alone. You belong to a line of seekers and strivers that stretches out in time past and future. I hope that my story may give you courage and inspiration, that it may be a torch, a flaming chalice, if you will, that you will pass to the next generation. In 1860, I was 25 years old and in college, working on a paper I called Female Character. I wrote, "The poets represent woman as an angel. Philosophers describe her as a fool, and the usages of common life make her a drudge. How shall we resolve these three contradictory views into one true picture?" You see, ever since I was a young schoolgirl, I had struggled with the way women are represented in my world. The prevailing religion of my time depicted the ideal woman as an obedient angel, decorative and static. I protested that woman is the ornament of society, but as the ornament, she is deprived of that discipline by which her powers are to be strengthened and increased. On the prairie farm in Michigan, where I grew up, roaming the woods and swamps and pastures, my mother and father shared their work equally. At first, my siblings and I had no school. When we didn't go to church, there was no Universalist church, not even in the village some distance away, called Schoolcraft. My mother taught me reading, writing, sums, and Universalist principles. My aunt and uncle were conductors for the Underground Railroad in town, helping nearly 1,500 enslaved people escape to Canada. I saw daily that my mother's and aunt's religion didn't stop with readings in a book. It was a living, doing faith, and women did the living and the doing at least as much as men. So as I grew up, I was called to ministry and to women's rights. I couldn't separate the two. Both of those vocations were dear to my heart, and I did not think of them as separate. Some modern thinkers say I was a suffragist who just happened to be a Universalist minister. Not true. Dana Green, who collected my writings in 1983 under the title Suffrage and Religious Principle, wrote this about me: Universalism was not incidental to her life, it was central and all-pervasive. This religious tradition provided Brown the principles from which she interpreted her world and the goals toward which she marshaled her considerable energies and talents. It gave her a sense of self-worth, designated a life's work for her, sustained her through bitter and troubling times, and helped her understand the meaning of American history. You see, I worshiped actively with my entire being. Unlike those who worked and worried to save themselves from eternal torture, I knew my divinity was love. With my universal salvation ensured, my expression of religion could focus on service to humanity in the here and now. Perhaps I should say the there and then. But an agitating for the right to a voice, to a vote, was part of that holy work. The world needed and still needs able-bodied women free from childhood to run, work, and play, and knowledgeable in some business or art that renders them independent. It did not need ethereal, winged beings floating on clouds and plucking on harps. The image of angels frittering away eternity while people were bought and sold. Hungry children worked 10-hour days, and war shattered lives around the world. It just did not sit well with me to give examples of injustice. Just toward women, I realize I'm only talking about sex here. I'm not talking about other forms of marginalization at this point. But in my time, Susan B. Anthony taught school and discovered that male teachers made $10 a week. She made $2.50 for the same work. In my time, Elizabeth Blackwell had to study privately with physician friends before being admitted to medical college. The faculty didn't admit her. It was a vote of the student body. Some say it was a practical joke. But she became the first female medical doctor in 1849. In my time, science was closed to women. Maria Mitchell studied with her father, an amateur astronomer, and discovered a comet in 1847, just because she was watching at the right time. Perhaps because of that celestial accident, she became the only female in the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1850. I lived to see women earn some rights, but I know there's still work to be done. In your time, women still earn less than men do for the same work, and the difference is greater for black and brown women and for women who are otherwise marginalized. This country has its first female vice president, but your governments and businesses still have a small percentage of women leaders. The Equal Rights Amendment struggles on. Well, eventually, my father and the neighbors built a school on our land. But as a child, I wanted more. I wanted to learn the way our corn crop wanted sunshine. My siblings and I went on to the village school. It was far enough away that we boarded during the week and returned home on the weekends. And after I finished that school and taught there for a short time, I went to the Mount Holyoke Female Seminary in Massachusetts. I was thrilled to attend one of the few institutions where women could experience higher learning at the time, but my hopes for a free pursuit of knowledge were soon dashed. Mount Holyoke dogged its students with rules from morning until night. There were rules to eat by and rules to sleep by, rules to breathe and rules to pray by. There were inquisitions in which students were encouraged to stand up and confess their small transgressions. I whispered during quiet hour. I did not darn my socks. And I wasn't truly encouraged to learn all I could. One chemistry professor said, "You're not expected to learn all of this, only enough to make you seem intelligent in conversation." Worst of all were the strictures around religion. We were encouraged in only one religious expression, to worship an angry, vindictive God. No kind parent this he would consign many of his children to eternal hellfire. Later, I wrote, most young ladies, before they graduate from such institutions, get what is vulgarly called religion, but which in its practical workings is most unlike the religion of Jesus. But I persisted. The next year, I enrolled at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. This was a coeducational school with Horace Mann, the great champion of public schooling, at its head. I admired this man who challenged one graduating class, "Be ashamed to die until you have achieved some victory for humanity." I thrived on Antioch's liberal educational atmosphere, not only in its classrooms, but also in its lecture halls, where I heard the likes of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Edward Everett Hale. But even here, all the speakers invited were male. This had to change. So I invited the Reverend Antoinette Brown Blackwell, no relation to me, but she was Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell's sister-in-law. Now, the history books argue about which of us Reverend Browns was the real first woman minister in the country. Piffle. We were not in a horse race. But to explain, Antoinette Brown had been ordained by her congregational church, but without the support of a religious denomination. By the way, she later became a Unitarian, so she's part of your history as well. Well, Antoinette Brown came to Yellow Springs. I recorded my reaction in my journal. It was the first time I had heard a woman preach, and the sense of the victory lifted me up. A suffragette and abolitionist, Reverend Brown reinforced my desire to become a minister. When I graduated from Antioch, I went on to St. Lawrence University Theological School. I graduated in June 1863, and that same month was ordained a minister by the Northern Universalist Association. The next several years were filled with preaching in churches in Vermont and New England, and in 1873 with my marriage to John Henry Willis. He supported my ministry and my continuing to use my maiden name, unusual for that time. Despite the other business of my life, I never entirely put aside the cause of women's rights. Early in my ministry, I took a short leave from my congregation to go to the new state of Kansas to advocate for suffrage. In the scorching summer of 1867, I traveled by wagon over dusty ruts, and I shared corn-shuck stuffed mattresses with Kansans who opened their humble doors to me. And at the other end of my career, I retired early from ministry to devote all my time to this sacred calling, to getting into what you might call these days holy trouble. In the 19-teens, as the Great War was being fought to make the world safe for democracy, I joined suffragettes who picketed daily in front of the White House, sometimes chaining themselves to its fence. President Woodrow Wilson called ours the greatest democracy on earth, but he seemed content to leave women out of it. I saw women knocked to the pavement in the sleet, banners torn out of their hands while police officers stood idly by. I saw those women wrestled into police wagons. Imprisoned, our heroines went on a hunger strike, and to end it, their jailers fed them by physical force. One icy day in Lafayette Square, I stepped up to a blazing fire and thrust in a sheaf of President Wilson's speeches, symbolically burning them to ash. Now, I never advocated for one political party or another. My advocacy was for the voice to participate in the political sphere. The Unitarian Universalist, as R.K. has said, the fifth principle was many years in the future, but in my mind, my actions supported the sacred right of conscience and use of the democratic process. Finally, in September 1918, Wilson did advocate for women's suffrage before Congress. It was another 2 years before Congress passed the measure, and it was ratified by enough states to become the 19th Amendment to the Constitution on August 18, 1920, 101 years ago this month. Days afterward, in September, I gave the sermon at the Universalist Church in Racine, Wisconsin, which was the last church I had served before I retired. I told the congregation, "The grandest thing has been the lifting up of the gates and the opening of the doors to the women of America, giving liberty to 27 million women, thus opening to them a new and larger life and a higher ideal. The future opens before them fraught with great possibilities of noble achievement. It is worth a lifetime to behold the victory." Immobilized as if cut into marble angels, women had been powerless to heal the great wounds in society, but as living, breathing, sweating, laboring people, they could support their families, educate their children, reach out to the poor, and vote for change in society. Like all people, women have spiritual responsibilities as well as rights. I wrote, "Woman will not be estimated by the moral elevation of her husband or her father when she's before the pearly gates. The question to be put to her will be, what is the condition of your own soul? How much have you in your character that is godlike? How has your spirit gained in strength, in truth, in purity by the discipline of life?" I myself was no angel, no perfect example of righteousness. When the Civil War was looming, I observed that enslaved females had even fewer rights and protections than enslaved males. I was faulted for seeing women's rights as more urgent than abolition of slavery. A product of my time also, I saw gender issues as binary. But in our evolving faith, knowing we are not perfect angels, we have the chance to live more fully into our values every year, every day, every moment. You see, then and now it isn't angels that we need women and men, we need people, and here they are, rolling up their sleeves, getting their hands dirty, wearing out their shoe leather, stirring up good trouble, raising their voices in gentle, angry song, marching forward in the conviction that we can shape a better world. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so. The closing hymn today is number 1028, "The Fire of Commitment." wonderful. Thank you to the Sandovals for the music this morning, and thank you as well, Jennifer Hua. I hope I have that name correct. When I gave that sermon in Racine, Wisconsin a century ago, this is what I asked the congregation to remember. Dear friends, there is nothing in all the world so important to you as to be loyal to this faith which is placed before you, the loftiest ideals, which has comforted you in sorrow, strengthened you for noble duty, and made the world beautiful for you. Go in peace and go in holy power. May it be so.